So this morning, Jonathan Majors spoke with Good Morning America, and he spoke up for the very first time, not only since he was found guilty of assaulting his ex-girlfriend Grace Jabarri, but also really for the first time since he was arrested. Him and his law team, since he was arrested, have stated over and over again that he was innocent and that he was actually the victim in the situation that happened. Jonathan Majors was arrested in March of 2023. Then he was charged with 4 cases of assault against his ex-girlfriend Grace Jabarri. Then in December, he was found guilty of reckless assault in the 3rd degree and guilty of harassment. Now in an exclusive interview on Good Morning America, which is actually owned by Disney, and we'll get into that story in just a bit, he has opened up about the entire trial, the entire situation, and is asked yet again if he did assault his ex-girlfriend, in which he continuously denies. So let's dive right into this interview and break it down. Keep in mind, we can only show some clips due to copyright reasons, but we'll link the whole interview in the pinned comment down below. And they did state that there is an extended version of this interview coming out tonight at 7 p.m. If there is a lot more information than that, we'll do a breakdown of that as well. And these are 2 separate videos that Good Morning America released this morning, consisting of the same interview. They just broke them down into 2 different parts, and we'll cover both in this video. In this interview, Jonathan Majors states that he did not physically abuse his ex-girlfriend, that he is going to appeal the court's decision in hopes that it could be turned around and he could be found not guilty. And he states that he does not think that his Hollywood career as an actor is over. The interview is conducted by Lindsay Davis, and she starts off by stating that Jonathan Majors is adamant that there was absolutely no physical abuse in the relationship with him and his ex-girlfriend Grace Jabarri.
He calls the 2-year relationship with Grace Jabarri toxic, dangerous, and unhealthy, but he is adamant. He says there was absolutely no physical abuse.
They then state that he could still face up to a year in prison, and the interviewer asks, why now? Why speak up now? Which Jonathan Majors said this.
Why did you decide you wanted to talk now?
I felt like it was time. A lot has happened in my personal life, in my career, in the culture. It's about responsibility and coming forward and being brave and giving my part of the story.
She then asked about his reaction to the verdict, in which he said he was absolutely shocked.
Your reaction to that verdict?
Shock. I was absolutely shocked and afraid. And I'm standing there, and the verdict comes down. I say, how is that possible? Based off the evidence, based off the prosecution's evidence, let alone our evidence. How is that possible?
Good Morning America then goes over the events that really took place the night before he was arrested, stating that he got a text from another woman that said, "Oh, how I wish to be kissing you," in which his girlfriend at the time, Grace Jabarri, grabbed his phone, where she claimed he physically tried to get it back from her, fracturing her finger and hurting her behind the right ear. The interviewer says she says that you did all of these things to her to physically abuse her, and Jonathan Majors straight up says that never happened.
She says inside the car, you hit her in the face,
Yeah.
twist her arm behind her back, fracture her middle finger.
Yeah, that did not happen.
How did those injuries come about?
I wish to God I knew. That would give clarity. That would give me some type of peace about it.
But you're confident you didn't cause
I have no
them.
question.
Then after this, Majors puts focus on him running away from Grace Jabarri, in which they do show the footage of him getting out of the car, running away, and she follows him. And he makes a really good point, stating that if the roles were reversed, it would have been very different.
What happens next is what the defense remains focused on. Majors runs off, and Jabarri chases after him.
If you watch those videos and you reverse that, and you saw a black man chasing a young white girl down the street, screaming and crying, that man is going to be shot and killed in the streets of New York City.
They then show that Jonathan Majors actually had injuries himself from Grace Jabarri.
How were you injured?
My injuries were, I had a scratch on my hand, you know, from clawing for the phone, and I had a gash on my, at the time I had a beard. Under my beard, I had essentially a fingernail scratch on my, I guess my cheek. from pressure, and that bled over.
They then go on to talk about how the prosecution stated Jonathan Majors to be an abuser, both physical and emotional and mental as well, bringing up previous times in the relationship where Jonathan Majors showed these signs, including a time where he got mad and he threw a candle on the ground, in which Jonathan Majors said, "Yes, I did do that." He said, "I completely lost my temper in the moment and threw it all on the ground." He said, "I absolutely did that. It's not something that I would want my child to do, and I feel absolutely terrible about it." They also then talk about the audio that was recorded by Grace Jabarri of Jonathan Majors speaking to her, telling her that she needed to be like Coretta Scott King and Michelle Obama, in which Jonathan Majors finally addressed what this was all about. Here's what he said.
It was me trying to give an analogy of what it is I'm aspiring to be, you know, these great men, Martin, President Obama, and trying to give a reference point to that. One of the things I also say is, like, I need her, in that case, Grace, to make the same sacrifices that I am making.
And then in the final question of the first clip, Lindsay asked him, "Do you feel that you are not responsible for any of Grace Jabarri's injuries at all?" And his response is very interesting, because in his response, he does admit that he stepped out on the relationship. He was seeing another woman. And if he had the courage to end his relationship with Grace Jabarri, then he wouldn't have been in this situation at all.
Do you feel you're not responsible for her injuries at all?
I shouldn't have been in the car. I shouldn't have stepped out of the relationship. I shouldn't have been in the relationship. If I'm not in the car, none of this is happening. If I leave the relationship, none of this is happening. If I'm man enough or brave enough to say, I want to see somebody else, or I'm done now, I'm not in that car. We're not here. I'm responsible for those things.
But none of her injuries.
I can't say that. None of her injuries.
Then Lindsay states that his sentencing is less than a month away, but legal analysts state that he is very unlikely to spend any time in jail at all. And she makes it clear that Jonathan Majors has said that he is planning to appeal. So to Jonathan Majors, this is not over yet. He is going to appeal the court's decision. Then Lindsay states that Jonathan Majors never took the stand during the trial, and we all wondered why he never testified, in which Lindsay then stated Majors said he always planned to take the stand and testify, but didn't in the end, because he felt that the prior testimony was so compelling that he felt that there was nothing else that he could add. But now that the jury has spoken, he felt that it was time to tell his side of the story. Then the interview begins, and Good Morning America does a good job at painting the entire picture here. They show Jonathan Majors stating how hard his life was, a clip that we showed in the beginning of this video, and then they dive into what happened, being sure to state that he was actually found not guilty to 2 of the charges against him. They state in a split verdict he was found not guilty of 2 other misdemeanors, assault with intent to cause physical injury and aggravated assault, in which they do a great job of explaining the difference between the charges he was found not guilty of and guilty of, very clearly expressing that the charges he was found guilty of was harassment that was unintentional. So they asked, did this really happen? Did he assault her? Even though it was unintentional, did it happen? Here's what he said.
In a split verdict, Majors was found not guilty of 2 other misdemeanors, assault with intent to cause physical injury and aggravated assault.
They're saying you didn't intend
Right.
to injure her,
Right.
but the result of your recklessness
Right.
injured her.
Right.
Were you reckless?
I was reckless with her heart,
Not with her body.
not with her body.
So again, Majors denies ever hurting her, ever abusing her, harassing her, or causing any physical pain to her at all, intentional or unintentional, or recklessly. He only says that he was reckless with her heart because he stepped out on the relationship. They then go on to state that Jonathan Majors was the one who actually called the police. After the altercation took place and Jonathan Majors ran away from her and they separated that night, he went back to his apartment and found her unconscious on the floor, and he's the one who called the police. And the interviewer asked if he felt that he did anything wrong that night and if he could relive it, if he would do anything differently, in which he said this.
You feel that you did anything wrong on the night of March 25th? If you could relive that night?
I wouldn't have picked her up. I wouldn't have picked her up. I wouldn't have put her back in the car. I wouldn't have tried to keep her in the car. I would have gotten out that car and ran immediately.
The interviewer then says that the prosecution described his relationship with Grace Jabarri as abusive, in which Jonathan Majors replied, "No, I loved Grace, and the relationship was toxic," and it was a term that he used, dangerous, and he should have had the courage to end the relationship, but he was scared. And he says that he should have been brave and he should have told her this isn't working and he should have walked away, but he didn't. She also asked him about the text where he threatened suicide, in which he stated that he's worked through that. He's not there anymore. He's not in that place where he would want to remove himself from a situation in such an extreme case, and he said that he's worked through that and he's not there anymore. That's not the place mentally where he is at. Then they asked a big question. When Jonathan Majors was arrested, a lot of people came out talking about how abusive Jonathan Majors actually was, mentally and physically, and they've stated that some of his past partners have basically painted the picture that he is indeed, in one way or another, an abusive boyfriend, an abusive partner. But Lindsay specifically asked, have you ever physically abused any of your past partners? And this is what he said.
I've had very few relationships, so I can gather what situations we're talking about. Yeah, I was not the best boyfriend all the time.
But never hit a woman?
Never hit a woman. My hands have never struck a woman, ever.
Then in the final part of this interview, they go on to state that before this all happened, Majors was in his prime. But moments after he was found guilty, Marvel Studios dropped him as Kang the Conqueror. So they ask, do you think your career in Hollywood is done?
You think you'll ever work in Hollywood again?
Yeah, I do. I pray I do. But it's God's plan and God's timing.
And then the final question is, do you think you deserve a second chance? And he states this.
What would you say? I mean, do you deserve a second chance?
Well, I think I do. I hope other people think that.
Now, this is where we get into more of the PR side of this interview. Like I mentioned, this was conducted by Good Morning America, which is on ABC News, which Disney owns, which means Marvel Studios and Disney fired Jonathan Majors, but then let him go on ABC News for the first exclusive interview of him speaking out, talking about how he believes he is still innocent. And I do think this was a great interview. I think it shed a lot of light on the situation, especially as to how Jonathan Majors particularly feels. And he also let us know that he is going to appeal and he hopes that he gets a second chance. So now people are really asking, well, is this just kind of a move by Disney to get the public kind of on his side, to hear his side of the story, to where if they do rehire him as Kang the Conqueror for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then they won't really get a lot of flack for it. This is basically a way for them to kind of gauge the public's interest to see what people would think if they rehired him. And this absolutely very well could be the case. And I think a lot of people actually hope that this is the case. A lot of people think that this was an unjust ruling, that they did not have enough evidence to prove that Jonathan Majors was abusive to her at all, or that he caused her injuries, especially when Jonathan Majors had injuries of his own and was running away from Grace Jabarri, trying to get away from her. This interview was very well done to show the side of Jonathan Majors, to show how he saw everything and how he said everything happened. And he admitted to the parts where he was wrong. He said that he did cheat on her. He said that he stepped out. He said that he should have broken up with her. He should have ended the relationship. He shouldn't have tried to put her back inside the car, but remained adamant that he never physically abused her. He never hurt her or any of his past girlfriends. And even his current girlfriend, Megan Good, was present in the interview, and they did show her for a brief moment in time. But this was absolutely very strategic by Jonathan Majors' part. During the trial, a lot went out against him without his side really being presented. And now he has presented his side in hopes that people will hear him, that they'll believe him, and give him a second chance. So let us know what you think about all of this down below. Do you think he deserves a second chance? Do you think he could win his appeal? And do you think he might return as Kang the Conqueror in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. And if you subscribe and leave a comment, you're automatically entered in our giveaway for a chance to win a PS5, an Xbox Series X, some Marvel Legends items, and some DC items as well. The winner picks one item, and we pick one winner at the end of each month. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter if you'd like. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.